To me, it's increasingly difficult to get somewhere in terms of project management jobs. And I'm not so sure whether it's the job market or whether it's project management has to change. We've sort of talked about that a little bit before. Um, but and before I just throw to you about your experience, I mean, my experience is I've always been told I'm overqualified, and not even what now, so okay, now, yeah, I'm really overqualified probably for most things. But even when I was in my mid-30s, I was overqualified. So it's like, it's just, I think, a bit of a throwaway, which is code for a whole bunch of other things. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's overqualified. I think it's now because project management is a it's really a generalist type of a role,
Mm,
and a lot of organizations are finding that they probably need someone that's a project manager, but they can't afford one. And so what they're doing is they're basically merging a lot of the PM roles into a subject matter expert type role. So then you're becoming, they're really wanting to have, I call it a splade, which is a splade is
yeah,
a fork, a spoon, and a knife in one.
yeah,
So this is like,
perfect.
one size fits all in
Yeah,
one role. And project management was never meant to be that. It was always a generalist type profession. And I know that the Australian Institute of Project Management is trying to get the profession recognised as a generalist, and they're
oh,
basically lobbying the government and advocating for it, because other
right,
countries such as Canada, US, New Zealand, they recognise it as a profession in its own right. And so that's something that I think we're behind in. It's not being
right.
recognised as a profession in its own right. They're expecting it to be rolled into something else, so subject matter expert with project management skills. So you're finding that a lot of companies are wanting, a project manager, but they've got to have specific skills in a particular software or a particular industry.
Yep.
And so therefore it's basically a unicorn in the whole.
Again, yes, because now that's an interesting take on it, really, because,
mm,
um, well, number one, that it's not recognised as a profession in Australia, which is pretty disappointing, really.
mm,
But the other thing that you were talking about with it being a unicorn or a spade, where it's
Blade,
a splade,
a
splade,
splade.
where it's everything to everybody.
Mm,
And I know that in the past I've been expected to be a business analyst, particularly. Look, I don't mind so much a change person because as a program director, I'm doing change anyway. But I draw the line at business analyst because it's not my best attribute. I can do it, but a business analyst is a different kettle of fish than a strategic project manager. But I think you're right. I wonder if they're trying to roll things in together because of a lack of understanding about what project management is, or money constraints, or whether people are just lazy. I mean, it's hard to know. Have you got any thoughts?
I think two things. I think firstly, people don't understand what it is and what project manager like what they do and what they're a
Yeah,
specialist in, which is project management, manage.
yeah,
They're not actually doing the work, they're managing the work, they're managing other people do the work. And secondly, I think it's a budget constraint. So that's why I talk about the splade analogy, in that they really need two people, but they're
yeah,
trying to roll the two types of people that they need into one job.
yeah.
And it's funny, I had this discussion this morning over coffee with someone, and he was saying the same thing. He said that, you know, many years ago he did his engineering, you know, degree. And so he could probably, you know, cut code, but he hasn't done it for like 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
And then he's applying for these project and program director roles, but they're expecting him to actually cut code. And he said, well, are you wanting me to cut code, or are you wanting me to be a program director? And they're saying, oh, we want you to do both. And I had the same conversation with him. It's like they're trying to cut costs, and so they're
Yeah.
rolling the two roles into one so that they can save on that and, you know, have this splade type of a person, which is it's happening, you know, quite a lot, and it's not something that I'm just experiencing. Other people were telling me the same thing.
Yeah, look, that's not good, because that's like asking
Mm,
the CEO of BHP to go and I don't know, just go and cut code, or not, maybe not quite to that degree, but to
mm,
go and now be a HR person and start doing change plans and things like that. It's horses for courses. And um, in my 25 years or so of project management, we've always had this conundrum, I've found, of organisations not really understanding what project management is when
mm,
I get there, and also not understanding what a project actually is, and and then what their role is in the project. So I generally will tell people and give, sort of educate people on that. But it's interesting, your experience this morning, because
mm,
so yesterday I spoke with someone who said that they had applied for this other role. They'd been in it for a couple of months. It was to be a 6-month role. Now they're in the role, and they're being expected to do more, to do more, to do more, to do more, um, which they don't really want to do, but it's not necessarily the right thing anyway. So they've applied for another role to try and get out of that. And as they're leaving that, the manager for the previous place is saying, well, we're going to re-advertise anyway.
mm.
And so, and I saw this on LinkedIn as well this morning, somebody else saying that they were in a 6-month role, and they've been 5 or 6 weeks into that role, and then the organisation said, well, actually, we'll have to let you go because we don't have the budget. You know, so there's not much security in
Mm.
project management. I don't know if it's happening across the board in other fields or not, but it's worrying.
So I think the nature of the job is that it's short term, because a project it has a start and finish date.
Yeah,
But I've always tended to try and find organizations that are big enough that have rolling projects. So you might
yeah,
have a project for a finance system, and then you might have one for a CRM or an ERP type system, or different types of projects. You're rebranding, so all the marketing materials need to be updated, for example. So, and I've always found that organizations have one that starts and finishes, and then you finish that, and then there's a pipeline of projects. There's so much
yeah,
demand and not
yeah.
enough project managers that you then get rolled into another. And I mean, that is the ideal scenario, where you're just rolling from one to another and to another. But nowadays, I think a lot of times the organizations hire people for a particular program or for a particular project, and then once that ends, everyone's disbanded and contracts end. And so a lot of
Yeah.
them are now hiring project managers or program managers short term,
Mm,
and it's very much a gig economy, where you're in and then out because the project has ended and there's no more demand for your type of skill, or another rolling project where you can just roll into the next one.
mm. Yeah, it's a bit difficult. I had my consulting company up until 2010, and I had, I don't know, 18 project managers or whatever I had. Um,
Mm,
couple of technical people as well. And we did pretty much do that. We were in large organisations, and my people tended to, move from one thing to the other. But it was always, as a CEO, it was always um, a concern to me. It was always a balancing act of trying to feed these people, making sure that I had the work. And whilst not all of those people were full-time permanent employees of mine, they were really valuable consultants that I had on contract that I'd had for quite a number of years and really wanted to keep one way or another. So when we're doing it by ourselves as a project manager, we're sort of running our own little company or own little business because we're increasingly marketing ourselves and putting ourselves out there. And I know that you do this, Margaret, with you network really quite effectively, and you're out there with groups and the Project Management Institute and things like that. But do you think that most project managers are adept at this, or is it a new skill that we have to learn?
The networking, or
Yeah,
yeah,
didn't
uh,
yeah,
yeah. So it's increasingly becoming something that you need as a tool under your belt, because a lot of roles are actually now obtained from your network and may not
mm,
be advertised, and it's increasingly becoming a huge percentage of roles.
yeah,
70% of roles that are not advertised, and they're referred to
yeah,
by someone you know in your network. So hence the reason why it's important to continue networking even when you're in a role, because
yeah,
that's where you'll get your next one.
yeah. That's a big percentage, isn't it? 70%.
Mm, yeah.
70%. And yet we still see advertised, like on LinkedIn, for example, or Seek, I
Mm,
guess, but I don't go there much anymore. The same ad is appearing
mm,
in numerous recruiters. And I don't know whether that's actually true, whether they are Reggie Ditch ones or whether they're just trying to do some data mining and get names or not. But it's an interesting phenomenon. I just want to talk to you a bit about the over experience thing. Have you ever been in a role where you're more experienced than the role?
uh, probably. I would say, I mean, I would always tend to ask for more kind of challenging work if I'm, being given something which, I have in the past been given something that's kind of more junior, and I've said, well, this
Yeah,
is kind of BA can do this sort of work. I don't need to do this sort of work. I can be
yeah,
given a project to run. And when you mentioned just a few minutes ago about that's where you draw the line, that I draw the line there too. I think
mm,
there's been so many opportunities where, for example, the project management, basically position has ended, and the company that I've worked at has offered that I take a BA role that's available, and I've said no. I've actually spent quite a lot of money and a lot of investment in education and
yeah,
trying to get my project management certifications, which are actually different to
yeah,
business analyst type work and education.
mm,
And I'm really not going to do that sort of work. It's a lot more detailed. It's not as
yeah,
generalist,
yeah,
and you're not managing,
mm,
you're not managing people, mentoring people, you're not looking at budgets, which
yeah.
is all the stuff that I love. Procurement, you're not doing procurement. So I mean, that's kind of something totally different.
Yeah, I mean, I did it a couple of years ago because a friend of mine was starting up his consulting company and just at the time, everybody was short on business analysts and you just couldn't find them anywhere. And I said, oh, look, I'll just do it, for you. And I did. And I found incredibly challenging because it's so detailed.
Mm,
But I did do it. And then that was sort of on my resume or hidden. I was able to hide that a little bit in my resume because I'd done some other work for the same company. But, recently, well, the last little while ago, I did something where I was a change analyst, and that's, quite a different skill set. Um, And this is leading me into that conversation about being overexperienced, right? So at the time, I really had to work hard at getting that role because I'd had another role which was extremely tiresome, should I put. It was a very difficult role. So I wanted to just relax a little bit. And I don't mean to say that change analysts aren't skilled, they certainly are. But going from transformation program director, it's a little bit different. Anyway, I did convince them that, I could just be a resource, could be there, and my experience could be used, and I would be happy to just do that role. And that all worked really well until the person that had been on maternity leave, who wasn't my role but was my would have been my manager, came on board, and she felt incredibly intimidated by me to
Mm,
the point where she tried to patronise me and tried to do it in public, in meetings. And this is again, I guess, where my experience comes in. I went, no, I'm not doing that. That's just not going to happen. I did speak to her quietly about it, but it just continued. And this is the thing about being overqualified. We know when we're overqualified. We know when we've got more experience, like you alluded to, right? And I
mm,
said to the organisation, look, this is, it's not going to work. I would be better utilised elsewhere in the organisation. Well, I mean, that basically led to me not having work at all because, I was going on holidays and there was nothing for me to come back to. But, this idea that we're overqualified, particularly as a project manager, is is something that I've noticed for quite some time, um, because of the very nature of us being transient and contracting.
mm.
It's not quite as easy as just going project coordinator, project manager, senior project manager. We bump all over the place. In reality, that's what we do. So when people say you're overqualified, like, give me some context on what you're talking about, recruiter. Because we're
Yeah,
not the same. We're not the same as some other roles.
yeah. So I have actually taken in the interim position. I think it was over Christmas or close to Christmas, and
Yeah,
I thought I'll just take it because I'm probably not going to get a project management role at this time, because usually that's a quiet time for project
yeah.
management. And it was actually a coordinator role with a bank. I won't say which one. I
Mm-hmm.
haven't put it on my resume, and it lasted 2 weeks because the role was actually helping the program director do change controls and get them approved. However, and this is something that I raised with her, the change control was about scope creep, but it
Right.
wasn't about the business telling the project coordinator or the program director what the scope was. It was about the program director was saying, you've got to actually tell the business that you're taking it off. And I said, but it's not for us to tell the business to take it off, to take off,
Exactly.
remove the scope. I said, it's
Yeah,
their product. They're the
yeah,
ones that have to tell us
yeah.
whether something is in or out.
Mm,
And so this is an example of traditional years ago where technology were the ones telling the business how
true.
things were to be run,
Yeah,
where
yeah,
in fact the business own the product and they're the ones that tell the technologists or the project team whether
yeah,
something should be in or out.
yeah.
And so we had a bit of a debate about this. She was still getting me to write it up on a change control to get signed off. And then I disagreed with it entirely because when you do a change control, it affects something else, usually the timeline
Yeah,
and the cost.
yeah,
And so you've got to actually include that as part of the change. And this is all about change control and making sure that it's approved scope, approved budget, and approved time.
Yep.
And it was actually and when she said, "Oh, look, this isn't working out. I'm going to have to end the contract," because she wasn't agreeing with what I was suggesting.
Yep.
And I said,
Yep.
"Well, the change control, when you get that approved by the sponsor, you need to have a requisite cost associated with the change. That is, that if you're taking scope out or if you're adding scope in, you're going to have to work out the cost." And I said, "I don't even know what the budget is or how much that's going to be worth. So you're
Mm.
getting me to get something approved without the total picture being included in the change control." So
Yeah.
this is something that, and she had no comeback. It was like it
Yep.
was a revelation. And I thought, this is like in the dark ages where, you're
Yep.
not getting the business to own the actual, product and
Yeah.
project, because they're going to be the owner. They're going to be, it's all about the benefits and making sure that they get the benefits. And it's
Mm.
not about us, or if we're in the technology team telling them, or the project team, the project office team telling them what should be. It's the other way around.
So that's a real misunderstanding of your role as well
Mm,
in that situation, and probably their own role as
mm,
well, which is interesting. I mean, here we are still, we're 2025, and I've been doing this since 1996. I think first joined the Project Management Institute when it first came to Australia. That's a long time.
mm,
And we're still talking about these same concepts. And whilst I have seen more and more education, more and more master's degrees, more and more and more and more in terms of project management, I'm really starting to wonder whether or not we've gone the right way with the education of the project management, or whether we should be looking elsewhere. I mean, when we talk, you and I, on the Ask a Mentor sessions, and if you're watching out there, please subscribe to the channel. Um, we are giving people technical how-tos as well as
mm,
a little bit more of a holistic. And some of the webinars that we're doing on the channel are more holistic. We're going to talk next week about gamifying project management to increase engagement. We did one recently about storytelling. Now, these are very different slants on the traditional project management. So, when we're going for our job interviews, I'm still finding that recruiters are in that dark ages that you're talking about. And I haven't been for a job interview for a while, maybe 2 years, but they will still say, "Did you deliver the project on time and on budget?" It's like, it's so much more than that.
mm.
But they still ask the same questions.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes, I mean, I've had projects where, you know, it although we did the work and the project team did all the work, the testing, the contracts with the vendors and things like that. In the end, we didn't go ahead with it because the vendor was not wanting to make the changes to make the software fit for purpose. So,
Right.
and it wasn't going to work because it was calculating incorrectly.
Yeah.
So we couldn't actually implement the software because it just would have meant that the company would have lost revenue from basically the revenue that they were calculating from this software. So that's
Mm.
that's what I mean about, calculating correctly. So that was actually a success because had we put it in, that would have been an absolute disaster. We stopped it before it went in.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it took us quite a bit of time to, do the business case, to get it off the ground, get it approved. That took 6 months. Get the project done, get the team together, get the vendors on board, get the contract signed, get the money approved, and all that sort of took all a long time. And then to the point where we tested it, and that was like 2 years down the track,
Yeah.
and then in the end, not fit for purpose.
Yeah, and look, that goes back to that conversation about if you're not hiring the right people and
Mm,
you don't really, as an organisation, understand the level of project manager that you require, you're going to get in a real big mess with some of these projects. And not just information technology, there are projects out there that are business specific projects. There are some out in the medical field, in the
mm,
building field. You know, you've got to have the right skill set um, to do it. And sometimes that might mean a very qualified person is working with a much less qualified or experienced manager in the
mm,
business. So, as project managers, we are often having to have those consulting skills to understand how to navigate that, or basically how to make the client or the business owner feel more comfortable. Um, but there's often it's not the other way around, just this where you're overqualified thing. And I wonder as candidates out there whether people are feeling more and more hesitant to speak up in interviews and to say, really, I think you've got a misunderstanding about what project management is, recruiter, or you're, trying to get this to fit into the spork
mm.
spade. What did you say?
Splade.
Splade.
Yeah.
Rather than it should be a knife and a fork and a spoon, not all the
Mm,
things together rolled into one. So, I mean, from a sociology perspective, the way that society is going with the job market and things like that, people are despondent. Things are moving fast in some areas. People are getting left behind. And out of that desperation, I guess, to get a role, um, people are putting up with things that they wouldn't normally put up with,
mm.
which is really not very good, certainly for the people that it's happening to. So I'm not quite sure where we're going to go from here, um, Margaret, but perhaps it's another conversation that we can have um, maybe after Christmas, because I think there are a lot of things that are sort of shifting in the project management space that we can talk about after Christmas, maybe. Because we've got next week, we've got the gamification, then we've got upskilling your project management. So we're really pushing into this, how do you change your career? What do you do? That's on the 27th of November. So that might be a good place for us to leave it, Margaret.
Great. It was great speaking with you.
It was nice to have a little chat, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, if you're watching, have a great project day. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.